early days of the Sony PlayStation, RPG fans waited patiently for the highly anticipated release of Final Fantasy VII. Around that time, console role-playing games were sparse in North America, and they were often considered unpalatable for some audiences. It was at that point that Konami released the original Suikoden to little fanfare. Even though the game was not highly marketed, it quickly captivated the interests of those who loved the genre and established itself as an incredible game in its own right. The title's incredible array of 108 characters, its unique battle system, and its infectious music were all considered among the game's most memorable qualities. Suikoden's most redeemable aspect, however, may well have been its underlying story. The goal of this video is to provide a complete storyline explanation for the entirety of the game. Whenever possible, official game footage and artwork will be used. And now, let's get into the tale. The Scarlet Moon Empire is the dominant governing entity in the world. It is led by Emperor Barbarossa, who emerged victorious over his political rivals in the War of Succession, which took place 15 years before the game begins. From the capital city of Gregminster, the Emperor has fallen under the influence of Windy, the Empire's court magician. Bearing a striking resemblance to Barbarossa's late wife Claudia, Windy has been manipulating the Emperor in ways that has changed his demeanor. Recently, regions of the Empire have been oppressed by high taxes and harassment by Imperial troops. Magic in the world of Suikoden is derived from runes, mystical objects with connections to the universe. The 27 true runes are uniquely superior to other runes, and imbue their holders with exceptional power. As the story begins, Teo McDole, one of Barbarossa's 6 great generals, is summoned before the Emperor. He brings along his son, Tyr McDole, who is nervous to meet him. After reminiscing about their days fighting together in the War of Succession, the Emperor asks Teo to head to the northern border of the Empire, where he is to protect it from the United City-States of Joustone. Barbarossa gives his sword Prak to Teo. Afterward, the Emperor meets Tyr as well. While Teo is away, he asks Tyr to help protect the northern border, where he is to accompany Kraze, a commander in the Imperial Guard. Windy compliments Tyr as well. Before they head back to their home in the capital of Gregminster, Tyr meets Kraze. The commander says Tyr will get no special treatment for being the son of a great general, and requests that he report to him the first thing the next morning. Back at home in the imperial capital of Gregminster, Tyr is welcomed by Gremio, a servant of the family and former soldier of the Empire. He also comes across Pan and Cleo, both of whom attend to Teo and his household. Upstairs, Tyr finds his best friend Ted. Eager to learn about Tyr's meeting with the Emperor, he asks if he can join the party to assist the Empire. Tyr explains the circumstances, and afterward, Ted asks if he can keep a secret. Called at that moment to dinner, he says they can talk later. As they dine, Teo informs Gremio, Pan, and Cleo that his duties call for him to travel northward, and asks them to take care of Tyr. Teo makes a toast to the Empire, and they all turn in for the evening. Early the next morning, Teo sets out without waking Tyr. Joined by Gremio, Pan, Cleo, and Ted, the group heads to meet with Kraze. He tells the party they are to venture to the Magician's Island, where Leknot the Seer lives. Leknot is the sister of Windy, and acts as an astrologist that can read the stars. Tyr and his friends are to seek her out and retrieve her readings. Because there are no boats to the island, Kraze arranged a dragon knight, Futch, to allow them safe travel upon his dragon Black. As Ted gets into an argument with the dragon knight, he inadvertently reveals that he is 300 years old. The group is lifted away on the dragon and soars through the sky toward the Magician's Island. There, they fight through a series of woods and defeat various enemies. At the end of the area, they come across Luke, who says he will prepare an appropriate challenge. Luke summons Golem, a powerful adversary, to oppose the team. Impressed with the power of the group, Luke realizes that Tyr and his friends have come to see Leknot, and instructs them to proceed inward. After climbing the stairs of the palace, the group finally reaches the Seer. She says she has prepared the astral conclusions, and asks the team to follow. As Tyr enters the chamber, Leknot is seen preparing her readings. After she learns Tyr's name, she explains that while she can see the future, she admits the future is not unchangeable. She adds that Tyr has a significant role to play in the development of the future, and that he will have to make several painful choices and experience a great deal of sorrow. After declaring that destiny is in his hands, she gives him the astral conclusions. Before they all leave, Leknot gives Cleo the fire crystal and says her job is to protect Tyr. Luke then takes them all to the shore by way of the wind rune, and they all fly back to Gregminster together on the dragon. Tyr delivers the astral conclusions to Kraze, who asks him to prepare for his next task. They are all to travel to Rockland, a town to the east of Gregminster, where the people are refusing to pay taxes to the Empire. They are to seek out the military commander of Rockland, Grady, to better understand the situation. Qlon, one of Kraze's subordinates, will accompany Tyr and his friends on the journey. After making their way to Rockland, Qlon demands to talk to Grady. Grady says the town has failed to pay its taxes because bandits on the nearby Mount Saifu have been pillaging the villagers. Grady asks if the party can dispose of the bandits so that the town's obligation can be fulfilled. Within the cavern to the mountain, they find the Queen Ant, a giant menace that stands in the party's way. Gremio advises running, but Ted says he has an idea and instructs everyone to stand back. As they do, Ted uses a rune that obliterates the monster, stunning everyone and causing Qlon to take notice. On the top of the mountain, the party encounters the two bandits, Varkas and Sidonia. After defeating them in combat, they reluctantly surrender and are brought back to Rockland. There, Grady accuses them of being tax thieves, but Varkas blames Grady of the same. Grady hands over 10,000 bits to Qlon, who tells the team to head back to Gregminster to report to Kraze. When they return, Qlon says he will report to Kraze alone and tells everyone to go home and rest. Pan suggests Qlon intends to take credit for the mission, but the group agrees to head to the McDole home nonetheless. However, Qlon asks Ted to come with him. Although he doesn't understand why, he agrees. Later that night, as Tyr, Pan, Gremio, and Cleo dine, they are interrupted by the alarm that Ted is found bloody lying in the entryway of the home. As they take notice of a magic wound upon him, he awakens and explains that he was brought into the Imperial Palace by Kraze, who introduced him to Wendy. Wendy seems to know who he is and says Ted hasn't changed in 300 years. Ted responds in alarm, apparently knowing her identity as a witch from his past. When she demanded that Ted hand over the rune on his hand, he resisted. He then held up his arm, using the Soul Eater rune to escape the predicament. After concluding the story, he passes out again, and the group wonders why the Imperial Guard is so interested in him. When Ted finally wakes up, he asks Tyr to take off his right glove. He admits that he carries the Soul Eater, one of the 27 true runes, the reason for which Wendy is after him. When Gremio asks why she wishes to obtain the rune, he says he doesn't know, but he's been trying to escape her clutches for 300 years. Ted says he'll never escape Wendy with the wound she has caused, so he decides to give the Soul Eater to Tyr for protection, even though he says it may bring him suffering. Tyr then extends his hand, and the Soul Eater is transferred to him. Just then, Kraze, Qlon, and the Imperial Guards force their way into the McDole household. They say that Pan tipped them off, who responds that he couldn't allow trouble to occur while Master Teo is gone. Kraze commands the guard to drag Ted out of the house. Cleo and Gremio stand up for Ted, who volunteers to be taken away peacefully because they still think he has the Soul Eater. Ted advises Tyr, Gremio, and Cleo to escape through the back of the house, and they agree. They make their way to the Gregminster Inn as it is raining, and spend the night there upon the invitation of Marie, the innkeeper. The next morning, Tyr and his friends awaken to an Imperial search party. They learn that Tyr is now considered a fugitive, having escaped the clutches of Kraze and his minions. As they're given trouble by the Imperial troops, a man emerges from a side room to convince them that the fugitives would never be so stupid as to hide within Gregminster. In a ruse, he volunteers to kick them out and takes them outside. Introducing himself as Victor, he says he knows the true identity of Tyr and asks how the group plans to escape. Victor volunteers to help them out of the city upon the condition that he can introduce them all to a friend of his. Tyr and his friends agree, and Victor joins the party. After Victor bribes a guard, the group hides their faces and exits the city gates. The adventurers then proceed to meet Victor's friend in Lenankamp to the south. Victor leaves to make some arrangements, and the party goes to the inn. After agreeing to stay the night, they question why Pan betrayed them. In that moment, guards swarm in under the information that fugitives are being harbored inside. Taken by surprise, Tyr and his friends contemplate their next move, but a figure appears behind the clock in the room and tells them to enter through a secret passageway. After entering, they find that the woman who saved them, Odessa, knows that they are acquainted with Victor. They soon learn that they are inside the headquarters of the Liberation Army, where Odessa introduces herself as the leader. Flick, Victor, Sanchez, and Humphrey are all part of the group, which opposes the Empire. As the son of an Imperial general, Victor says Tyr would make a great addition. Gremio thinks it is a crazy consideration, but Cleo thinks Tyr should consider joining. The conversation is interrupted by a wounded man who reveals that the Mount Saifu bandits are working to undermine the Empire, but their leaders Varkas and Sidonia were captured by Imperials. Grady now has them strung up and starving to death in Rockland. Knowing they are the same bandits they helped to capture, Tyr and his friends agree to assist them to right their wrong, and Flick says they'll have to keep a low profile. Victor agrees to join the party, and they make their way out of the hideout. Back in Rockland, the crew finds that Grady has set up security to prevent entry into his house. Victor lights the house on fire, giving Tyr and his friends a diversion to enter. Fighting their way through guards, they eventually make it outside, where they help free the two bandit leaders from their bondage. Grady realizes the group has betrayed the Emperor and freed the bandits, and promises to tell Kraze about their treachery. As they leave town, Varkas says to tell Lady Odessa of his intention to repay the Liberation Army. Back in Lenankamp, Odessa learns of Tyr's success. The party is also informed of the Liberation Army's plans to develop a fire spear, which can be used in the future to overcome the Imperial Army. Odessa tells Tyr that the blueprint for the weapon must reach the secret factory of the rebellion, and wants him to deliver it. Gremio balks at the prospect of betraying the Empire and Tyr's father, and warns him to turn down the mission. However, Cleo intends to let Tyr decide their fate, and says she will protect him regardless. Ultimately, Tyr decides to take the mission. Sanchez says that over Mount Tigerwolf is a village called Saradi, where a factory contact will accept the plans. Odessa decides to join the party to assist, and Flick is told to remain to protect the headquarters. After climbing Mount Tigerwolf with Odessa, Tyr and his friends are stopped by Leiden, who encourages them to spend the night at his inn. The group agrees and is offered some tea. After they taste it, they all pass out, and it is revealed that Leiden drugged the tea. He then robs the group, stealing all the money from the party. Just then, Kessler comes in, who Leiden refers to as boss. He then realizes that Leiden has stolen from Odessa, the leader of the Liberation Army, and orders Leiden to prepare an antidote. When they awaken, Kessler apologizes for the deed, and the team stays the night. The next morning, they continue their journey through the mountain and eventually reach Saradi. Odessa says to meet the contact at the inn, so they enter and stay the night. Tyr awakens and finds Odessa on the patio. She tells him that she feels overwhelmed by her responsibility as the leader of the rebellion, and admits the desire to run from the conflict at times. When Tyr says he intends to rejoin the Empire, Odessa laments that the next time they'll meet, they'll likely be enemies. Even still, she tells Tyr to follow his heart regardless of the circumstances. As they converse, the ninja Cage appears to receive the plans for the fire spear. Back in Lenankamp, they find the innkeeper dead. Odessa discovers that the Imperials have broken into the Liberation Army headquarters and heads down through the secret entrance. After Tyr and his friends defeat several groups of guards, Odessa is found wounded on the ground. As the group tends to her health, she lifts her cloak to reveal a child, who she saved from the slaughter. Realizing that she has been mortally wounded, she admits to failing as a leader. Knowing that she is about to die, she makes two final requests. First, she asks Tyr to deliver an earring to a man named Matthew in the village of Seika. Secondly, she asks that her body be thrown into the nearby stream so that rebel sympathizers don't despair in her death. She says to tell Flick that his kindness always saw her through hard times, and hopes Tyr will get to realize the free world that she never had a chance to see. To get to Seika, the team must traverse the fortress of Quaba, which Victor says will pose a challenge. When they arrive, Cleo says the fortress is guarded by Lord Ein Guide, an old friend of Master Teos. To pass through undetected, they decide to take assumed names. By way of Victor and Gremio's acting skills, the ruse works, and Ein Guide is convinced to allow Tyr and his friends through. In Seika, a man says that Matthew lives in a home up the steps to the northeast. Inside, the children say that Master Matthew is outside taking a walk. When the man they talked to earlier admits to being Matthew, Gremio offers him the earring Odessa wanted him to have. Matthew then realizes she has died and regrets that she got caught up in the struggle with the Empire and calls her a fool. After telling Tyr and his friends to leave, Imperial soldiers swarm into his home. They say they have orders from Kasim Hazil to seize him and make him assist the Empire in the war, but Matthew says he'll have nothing to do with it. When the guards threaten to punish a child at Matthew's house if he refuses, Tyr and the others intervene on his behalf. After the guards are defeated, Matthew says he knows Tyr is the son of Teo and reveals he is Matthew Silverberg, the brother of Odessa. Though the two had their differences, Matthew admits to being a coward by avoiding involvement in the resistance. However, he realizes that his desire to escape would never change the world, and commits himself now to Odessa's cause. Matthew gives Tyr the earring Odessa left to him and proclaims him the new leader of the Liberation Army in her stead. Though Gremio and Cleo realize following Tyr means being traitors, they agree to do so. Matthew instructs the team to recruit followers throughout the world and says that a new Liberation Army headquarters will need to be established to withstand Imperial attacks. He consequently advises Tyr to seek out the abandoned castle in the middle of Lake Toran for that purpose. In the harbor town of Kaku, Tyr learns that Gremio is in debt to a woman named Camille for costs accrued from a banquet. Though they cannot pay at the moment, Camille demands to join the party until they can repay her. Downstairs, they find Tai Ho, who says that Tyr and his friends must be mad to venture to the castle in the middle of the lake because it is infested with monsters. However, he's willing to risk his life to make the trip with his ship if Tyr bets all the money on a dice game. After Tai Ho is beaten, he agrees to prepare the boat, and they all set sail for the castle. After approaching it, the group disembarks and fights their way through the inside, with Tai Ho accompanying Tyr. In the heart of the castle, they are surprised to discover a slumbering dragon. When they get close, he attacks. With the help of his friends, Tyr defeats the dragon and lays claim to the structure. They decide to name it Toran Castle, which will now serve as the headquarters for the Liberation Army. Inside, Matthew congratulates Tyr. Leknot suddenly appears and gives Tyr the Stone Tablet of Promise, which contains the names of those who join the Liberation Army. 108 in total, they are called the Stars of Destiny. In addition, Leknot summons Luke, who says he will serve Tyr as part of the new Liberation Army. Matthew recommends that Tyr track down some recruits, including a man named Lepant in the village of Qlon. Lepant's attendant Giovanni says that he is busy at the moment and will not allow the group to meet him. A man named Kryn says the only way to draw Lepant into meeting is by sneaking into his house and stealing his prized sword Karinji. With Kryn's help, Tyr and the party sneak into Lepant's house. Inside, they find the sword and take it outside. That night, Kryn admits that he divulged their location to Lepant, who barges into the inn and demands the return of his sword. The only thing that calms him is learning that Matthew led Tyr to him. After Tyr returns Karinji, Giovanni frantically warns that a new military commander of the town, Kraze, kidnapped Lepant's wife Eileen. In a rage, Lepant quickly dispatches some guards and with the help of Tyr fights his way through more. When they reach Kraze, he says that he has been reassigned to the home due to Tyr's misdeeds. As Kraze threatens Eileen, he calls upon Pan to enter and instructs him to capture his former friends. At first, Pan seems torn about what to do, but ultimately charges forward, throws Kraze to the side, and saves Eileen. Tyr allows Kraze to escape, but talks with Pan, who apologizes to everyone for tipping off the Imperials to their location. Still, he now wishes to join the Liberation Army, and they all agree to take him in. Lepant and his wife, now realizing they are fugitives as well, also agree to join the cause. Back at Toran Castle, Varkas and Sidonia have arrived to join the Liberation Army in order to repay Tyr and his friends for their assistance. Varkas wishes to speak to Odessa, but Matthew tells him she has gone north on a mission and informs him that Tyr is now the leader. The Liberation Army holds a banquet to celebrate the addition of new friends, and everyone converses. As Tyr leaves the dining hall though, a ninja demands the rune on his hand and attacks. After he is defeated, he says that the Liberation Army has no chance against the Empire, and that Windy is prepared to destroy the rebellion. After he flees, Pan and Gremio argue over who will stand guard over him. As Tyr heads to the boat, he finds an elf named Kirkus that is washed upon the shore. He is helped by the Liberation Army, and when he awakens, he asks to speak to Odessa. When he is told Tyr is the new leader, he reveals that the great Imperial General Quanda Rossman has launched a plan to exterminate the Elves. He asks for assistance, but Matthew says the Liberation Army's forces are currently insufficient. Nevertheless, he recommends a reconnaissance mission to aid Kirkus and the Elves. When Tyr and his friends reach the Great Forest, Kirkus guides them to a trail nearby. When they reach the Kobold village, they realize that all the Kobolds are missing except for one, Kurumimi, who says that his friends have been taken away. When they finally arrive in the village of the Elves, a woman named Valeria is warning of Quanda's plans to burn down the forest and destroy the Elves. Kirkus informs the village elder that Tyr and his friends are part of the Liberation Army and have arrived to protect the village. Even still, the elder proclaims that humans should not be trusted. Kirkus is put under arrest for leaving the village without permission, and Tyr and his friends are jailed with him. Within the cell, they talk to Valeria, who says she left her post in the Empire and was caught up in the same trouble. She says that Quanda has commissioned a powerful weapon, the Burning Mirror, to exterminate the Elves, and says that it has the power to burn down an entire village. Eventually, Sylvina questions Kirkus's desire to bring in the humans, but permits them all to escape. Kirkus says that the dwarves to the northeast should be contacted for more information on Quanda's plans. When they all get there, they ask the Dwarven Chief about his knowledge of the Burning Mirror, and he answers that the device is a Dwarven treasure. When he hears that Quanda plans to use it to exterminate the Elves, he cheers the prospect on. The Chief doubts her and dares the party to steal the running water route from the Dwarven Vault to the north. To do so, they enter the vault and fight their way through its monsters. Deep inside, they run into Gigantus, a terrifying foe. After he is defeated, they obtain the running water route. When they bring the item back to the Dwarven Chief, he agrees to assist the Elves, and says he will instruct the dwarves to build a weapon that can destroy the Burning Mirror. As they head back to the Elven village, they notice a huge inferno in the distance. As it turns out, Kirkus's former home has been completely charred. As Kirkus laments the annihilation of his people, he says that he intended to give Sylvina a ring. Believing it futile now, he tosses it to the ground. Gremio attempts to lift his spirits and suggests returning to Toran Castle to plan a campaign against Quanda Rossman's army. Back in the Kobold village, Kurumimi is being hunted down by Imperial troopers. Valeria offers to turn herself in if Tyr and the others will not be hurt, and the Imperials agree. After she does so though, they immediately order the execution of the rest of them. Kurumimi joins the party and they attack. Afterward, Matthew arrives with the Liberation Army and the soldiers retreat. Sylvina arrives to hug Kirkus, having been rescued in time by Stallion. After learning about the Burning Mirror, Matthew says that survivors from the old Liberation Army have rallied to Toran Castle, and there are now enough resources to launch an attack against Quanda. When they approach Pannu Yakuta Castle, the Liberation Army engages Quanda's force. Quanda promises to destroy the Liberation Army on behalf of the Emperor, but the rebellious force is able to overcome the Imperial Army in the field. Immediately afterward, Quanda promises to prepare the Burning Mirror. Matthew orders all forces to disperse, but Quanda says it is too late. As he prepares to unleash the mirror's destructive power, it shatters into pieces, and Quanda is left stunned. As it turns out, the Dwarven Chief has deployed the power of the wildfire cannon just in time. Victor recommends seizing the moment to storm the castle and confront Quanda himself. Inside, they encounter a giant dragon that guards the balcony. After it is defeated, the party corners Quanda outside. Realizing that Tyr is the son of Teo, he pledges to protect the Emperor and take on Tyr with the power of the Black Rune given to him by Windy. The two engage in an epic one-on-one battle, but Tyr emerges triumphant. In defeat, the Black Rune on Quanda's arm is destroyed, and the general falls to the ground. As they all discover, the Black Rune took control of Quanda's mind. Kirkus and Kurumimi attempt to seek revenge, but Gremio realizes that Windy has manipulated him, and Tyr decides to spare his life. Now aware of the duplicity of Windy and the Emperor, Quanda agrees to join the Liberation Army on the invitation of Tyr. Matthew congratulates Tyr on the Liberation Army's first successful military victory, and the Kobolds are reunited. Kirkus, Sylvina, Stallion, Valeria, and Kurumimi all join Tyr's cause. They all return to Toran Castle to find that Flick has survived. He demands to know the location of Odessa and asks about the status of the Liberation Army. Matthew arrives to break the news that she has been killed. In shock, Flick, Sanchez, and Humphrey learn that Odessa perished when the Liberation Army's hideout was discovered. In disbelief, Flick ridicules Victor for failing to protect her. Unconvinced that Tyr can succeed her as leader, Flick leaves for the Kaku Inn and threatens to form his own faction of rebels. When they catch up to him in Kaku, Flick has become calmer, and Victor apologizes for Odessa's loss. He admits that he lost sight of what he was fighting for in his earlier rage, but says he cannot accept Tyr as leader yet. For now, Flick and Tyr agree to join forces in a conciliatory act, and Flick agrees to bring his men to Toran Castle. Inside, Flick warns that Milich Oppenheimer, one of the 5 great generals of the Empire, has cracked down on rebel factions. Matthew says that liberating Milich's domain is now feasible with Flick's support, and Tyr agrees. At the Battle of the Fortress of Garen, the Liberation Army clashes with an Imperial force. After it is defeated handedly, Victor scoffs at their lack of power. Matthew advises sending a reconnaissance force to learn more about Milich's plans, but Flick declares that the opportunity to strike is closing and demands an attack. Pursuing the latter course, the Liberation Army approaches Scarlaticia Castle, Milich's stronghold. In futility, the Liberation Army prepares a strike just as Milich releases poisonous pollen upon the battlefield, wiping out the Liberation Army and forcing a retreat. Tyr now assembles a reconnaissance force after all, and the crew enters Milich's domain. In the town of Tien, Tyr enlists the help of Jen to outfit a boat to navigate the Dunan Rapids. Next door, Commandul says an oil power machine he has developed can be attached to a boat to allow travel upstream. The team carries the heavy machine on their backs to Recon, where they unload the machine and rest at the inn. That night, Gremio awakens and confesses that Tyr has grown so much more powerful and may no longer need his protection. By the next morning, Jen and Commandul have installed the machine onto the boat, and it is used to reach the hermitage of Liu Khan, a brilliant doctor. As he is asked to prepare an antidote for Milich's flowers, Milich himself arrives on the back of a dragon. The general accuses Tyr of being a traitor to the Empire, and says he intends to take precaution to safeguard his poisonous flowers by imprisoning Liu Khan. Though the doctor tries to resist, he is grabbed by Milich and taken into the air on his dragon. Back at Toran Castle, Matthew is brought up to speed on the setback. He prepares a letter to be delivered to a counterfeiter named Kimberly and a man named Tesla, who he wishes to involve in his plan to defeat Milich. When the note is delivered to Kimberly, she agrees to join as long as Flick takes her out to dinner. After hiding his identity, Tesla agrees to join as well, having been alerted to the fact that Matthew needs his services. At Toran Castle, Matthew says that Kimberly and Tesla have already prepared forged Imperial papers so that Tyr and his friends can get into Sanier prison, where Liu Khan is being held. When they arrive, Victor presents the papers, and the party enters the prison. Inside, they find Liu Khan in a cell and free him. As they prepare to leave, however, Milich himself pulls a lever and locks them inside a room. As Victor prepares to fight, Milich holds up a bottle of poisonous spores, which are capable of eating humans alive. He throws the bottle to the ground, shattering it and releasing the spores. He exits the room, leaving the party inside. Gremio suddenly pulls the switch to allow everyone out of the room and locks himself inside. Intending to sacrifice himself for the good of Tyr and the others, he apologizes for being unable to protect Tyr any longer. He says that Tyr has made him proud, and gives a final goodbye. Matthew ultimately arrives to open the door, and learns of Gremio's death. Falling to the ground in sadness, Tyr laments the loss of his great friend. At the Liberation Army headquarters, Liu Khan has announced he has prepared the antitoxin to use against Milich, and agrees to join the cause. Colliding with Milich's forces once more, this time the Liberation Army is triumphant. Afterward, Tyr enters the castle with a hand-picked group to track down the general. On the balcony, he finds the giant rose emitting the pollen. As Matthew orders the flowers burned, Milich arrives and his hand begins to burn. The black rune Windy gave him is now destroyed, and Milich, like Kwanda, suddenly comes to normal consciousness again. Tyr's friends all wish to kill Milich to avenge Gremio's death, and say the general can't be forgiven. However, Tyr decides to spare the general's life, and Flick now accepts Tyr as the leader of the Liberation Army. Understanding that Wendy is an evil sorceress that has manipulated the Emperor much like the Empire's generals, Milich joins the Liberation Army. Immediately afterwards, Stallion arrives to relay the message that the Imperial Army is heading toward the castle. A ninja named Kasumi arrives at Toran Castle and explains that Rokaku has fallen to Imperial forces under Teo McDowell, Tyr's father. She agrees to join the Liberation Army and asks for assistance. Realizing the time has come to face Teo, Tyr and his friends make preparations for battle. Matthew recommends engaging Teo in a brief skirmish to test their forces, and they take to the battlefield. Teo calls the Liberation Army traitors and promises to take no mercy, even in regard to his own son. The Liberation Army is defeated overwhelmingly by Teo's armored cavalry, and Matthew suggests pulling back. In hot pursuit, Teo and his forces attempt to catch up with the beleaguered rebellion. Pan says he will hold them off while the others escape, and stays back to meet Teo. The general commands him to step out of the way, but Pan refuses. In defiance, he stands up for the Liberation Army and engages in a one-on-one duel with Teo. After exchanging blows, Pan emerges victorious, and Teo escapes. That night, Leknot appears again before Tyr and encourages him to push forward despite the loss of Gremio and the battle with his father. She also informs Tyr that she and her older sister, Wendy, are survivors of the Clan of the Gate. She says that the Soul Eater, the true rune Ted gave to Tyr, has yet to unleash its full potential, and warns that catastrophe will result should it fall into Wendy's hands. The next morning, Flick advises following up on the Fire Spears to defeat Teo's armored cavalry by way of the Liberation Army's secret factory. At the secret factory to the north, Tyr and his friends find Kessler and Leiden again, this time in an argument with a giant woman named Ronnie Bell. They join the Liberation Army and find out that the blacksmith Mose has been producing fire spears. However, they cannot be transported without a boat, so Taiho suggests going to Kirov where he can get assistance from a friend. The adventurers receive the fire spears and head there. After talking with Kunto, he agrees to lend the Liberation Army 10 boats to transport the fire spears. The weapons are loaded onto the boats and brought to Toran Castle. When the Liberation Army regroups, Tyr gives the order to advance against his father. Now equipped with the fire spears, Tyr's forces make quick work of the armored cavalry and Teo's forces are demolished. Afterwards, Matthew requests that Teo surrenders. His subordinates Alan and Grenseal urge to continue resistance, but Teo says to stand back. Teo calls his own son a traitor to the Emperor and the most wanted man in the country. He challenges his son to a duel, and Tyr accepts despite the warnings of his friends. In a one-on-one battle, Tyr manages to get the best of his father, and Teo falls. On the ground, he tells his son he has become strong, but he has no regrets. He says he is proud of his son for living for his beliefs. As Teo lies dying, he asks Alan and Grenseal to join the Liberation Army. In his last breath, Teo says that the greatest happiness that a father can experience is to see his son surpass himself. Overcome with loss, Tyr kneels to the ground, and the Soul Eater reaches level 3. At Toran Castle, Lepant reports that insurgencies are breaking out throughout the country, and the Empire is gathering its rural forces. Intending to unite the rebel factions, Tyr and his friends head to the Lorimar region. When they get there, the fortress appears to have been deserted. They pass through the area and reach the warriors' village, where they find a young couple, Hicks and Tengar, arguing. Hicks urges Tengar not to risk her life, but she remains stubborn. When they mention something about Neclord, Victor takes immediate interest. Tengar's father Zorak says that Neclord arrived in the town some time ago as an imperial general and turned his men into zombies and skeletons. He threatened the locals and demanded Tengar. Zorak adds that the warriors' village has a proud heritage of resilience against danger. Hicks expresses doubts in his strength, but Cleo gives him reassurance. Victor says that Neclord used the rune to become a vampire and destroyed the village where he was from. Ever since, he has sought vengeance for his family. The next morning, Neclord has arrived in the village with his zombies, causing incredible alarm. He again demands Tengar, but Zorak refuses. Zorak and the villagers charge against Neclord, but they are quickly vanquished by the might of the vampire. Victor courageously provokes him and attacks. Despite their best effort, Neclord destroys Tyr and his friends with his immense power, and boasts of his triumph. Hicks is too timid to oppose Neclord, and Tengar is taken away. He says he will not hurt the villagers, and Hicks promises to rescue her. When Tyr awakens, Victor says a special weapon is necessary to defeat Neclord. Zordak suggests they venture to the Temple of Qlon to the west, which holds a secret. Fukian, the head monk of the temple, guides them to the Cave of the Past, where he says their destiny lies. Deep inside, they find a magical sword standing upright. As they approach, it starts to speak, and says whoever awakens it will be cursed. With its magic, it swallows the party into a void. Inside, they arrive at an unknown location. As they search around, they find a young boy run through the village. When he is spoken to, he asks if Tyr and his friends have come to take away the treasure. The boy answers to the name Ted, and runs into his grandpa's home. Surprised that the boy answers to the same name as Tyr's best friend, they scout around more. The village chief commands them to leave the place, and instructs Ted to go inside. The chief continues to be evasive, but speaks of hiding from a woman. In abrupt fashion, Windy appears outside, and they all run out of the home. With her is Neclord, and the party watches as Windy demands the chief's rune, the Soul Eater. The chief pretends to not know of what she speaks of, so she threatens to burn the village of the hidden rune entirely. As Tyr and his friends look on, the village suddenly bursts into flames, and Windy scoffs that Uber has struck due to the chief's denial. She again insists that the rune is given to her. In response, the chief utilizes the full power of the Soul Eater, and the rune's power opens a gigantic void that brings the party to safety. Inside the home again, the village elder apologizes for embroiling the party in danger, and calls for Ted to approach him. He asks Ted to extend his right hand, and commands the Soul Eater to part from his own body and go into Ted's. The rune's magical force then illuminates, and transfers its incredible power from the chief to Ted. The elder apologizes to Ted for passing the burden to him, and warns that the power of the rune should never be unleashed. The chief asks Tyr and his friends to take Ted and run, while he distracts Windy. When they sneak out the back of the home, they encounter Uber, an incredibly powerful knight. Victor can feel his terrible power and cautions his friends. As Uber attempts to attack, Neclord appears and instructs him to attend to Windy. When Victor tries to stop him, Neclord says he will take him on another time. Ted wonders what happened, but Cleo tells him he'll have to depend on himself from now on. Tyr and his friends now realize that the incident they just witnessed transpired 300 years in the past, and that Ted is the same one they know. Though he wishes to travel with them, Ted is told he must stay behind while the rest return to their time. He is also instructed to remain strong and guard the rune. After they all return to their own time, they again approach the sword. When Victor tells it that he intends to kill Neclord, the sword offers to assist him, and tells him to take hold of it. Victor then picks up the Star Dragon sword, and the group returns to the warrior's village. There, Zorak learns that Victor has discovered a method to defeat Neclord, and meets the Star Dragon's sword. The villagers say they have been invited to Neclord and Tengar's wedding, inspiring them to strike the vampire ahead of Tyr. At Neclord's castle, Zorak and his men organize at the gates, and Neclord himself steps outside and heckles them. He refuses to return Tengar, and says their wedding will commence when the sun sets. He seals the gate with a magical force, but Victor says they must attempt to proceed anyway. Hicks begs to join them, but Zorak warns that he has not yet proven himself as a warrior. Even so, Hicks says he must keep his promise to Tengar, and Tyr allows him to join. Realizing his newfound courage, Zorak grants him permission to name his sword and assist the party. In the inner sanctum of Neclord's castle, they step up as the vampire begins to play the organ. He steps down from it as Tengar, in wedding garb, is standing by his side. Tengar witnesses Hicks's courage, and Victor reminds the vampire of his atrocities at the village of Northwind. He steps forward, holding up the Star Dragon sword, and threatens him. Likewise, Hicks steps forward as well with his newly named sword, Tengar. Though Neclord poses a challenge, the adventurers defeat him. Neclord now realizes the power of the Star Dragon sword. Victor declares that Neclord's 500 years of evil deeds have come to an end, and slashes forward at the vampire. Tengar calls Hicks a hero, and they all leave the castle. Zorak expresses his appreciation and offers his aid to the Liberation Army. Back at the Liberation Army's headquarters, Matthew says that Kasim Hazil has been placed in charge of the Imperial defenses in the north. To challenge him, Humphrey recommends befriending the Knights of the Dragon's Den to the west, a neutral party. Sanchez says that Tyr will have to speak in person to Joshua, their leader, to solidify an alliance. At the Dragon's Den, the gatekeeper at first denies Tyr's entry, but with Vincent's help, they find a hidden entry behind a nearby rock. After entering the cavern behind it, they stumble into a large room full of dragons. Futch, the knight that took Tyr and his friends to the Magician's Island long ago, is joined by Milia, deputy commander of the Dragon Knights. She runs ahead to report to Joshua of the Liberation Army's arrival. At the Dragon's Fortress, Tyr and his friends meet Joshua. When they ask for his assistance to oppose the Empire, Joshua admits that the gates to his domain have been shut because the dragons have been sleeping unexpectedly, news he hid from the rest of the country. As such, his people have been powerless, and Joshua has been attempting to search for answers. Joshua says that Liu Khan, the legendary doctor, could probably be of assistance. When he is brought inside, he agrees to assess how to awaken the dragons. After doing so, he deduces that the dragons have been poisoned, and explains that curing them will require moonlight weed, black dragon orchid, and another item. For now, he says to seek out the first two ingredients. For the moonlight weed, the party heads to Seek Valley by way of Milia and her dragon Thrash. There, they encounter a powerful enemy, the Crystal Core. When it is defeated, they press forward and find the moonlight weed. As they walk toward it though, they are stopped by Windy, who knows of the moonlight weed's power. Windy says she will not allow them to take the plant and instructs Tyr to hand over the Soul Eater. However, she says she will not force him and summons Ted. Ted asks Tyr to give back the rune, saying that it was the only way he was able to stay alive. The rune reacts to the circumstances and Tyr raises his right arm. The Soul Eater's immense power creates a void and sweeps Tyr and Ted into it. Ted says he still maintains a connection with the Soul Eater, but his body has been taken over by Windy's Conqueror rune. The rune's power will eventually take over his soul, and he asks Tyr to forgive him for what he's about to do. Back with Windy and the others, Ted berates the rune for causing so much turmoil in the world, and says it has claimed the lives of Odessa, Teo, and Gremio. Ultimately, Ted asks the Soul Eater to claim his soul so it cannot be taken by Windy. Tyr's right arm raises once more, and the rune illuminates. Ted's soul is siphoned into the Soul Eater, which reaches level 4. Windy attempts to take the rune again but fails. She escapes, and Ted bids his friends farewell, now free from the magician's manipulative power. The party then takes the moonlight weed back to Liu Khan and Joshua. Unfortunately, Liu Khan says the other ingredient, the black dragon orchid, can only be found in the floating garden at Gregminster. Despite the risk, Futch is left on his own to attempt to retrieve it. When he lands at the flying garden, he soon finds the plant, but Emperor Barbarossa catches him in the act and walks toward him. When he asks what he's doing there, he admits that his intent was to obtain the orchid to awaken the dragons. Thinking Windy is at fault for causing their slumber, the Emperor tells him to leave immediately. Just as he runs back to his dragon, Black, Windy appears and tries to catch him before he can leave. He escapes in the nick of time, but Windy accuses him of treachery and fires a bolt of magic into his dragon, blasting it out of the sky and injuring Futch. He awakens back at the Dragon Knight's fortress and learns that the others obtained the orchid from his hand. Liu Khan says the third ingredient in the antitoxin was a dragon's liver, which had to be taken from Black. With the dragon's awakening, Joshua agrees to form an alliance with the Liberation Army and fight side by side against the Empire. With the help of Milia's dragon Thrash, Tyr and his friends return to Toran Castle. Inside, Kryn and Kasumi are in the middle of an argument over the presence of a spy. Matthew learns of the new alliance with the Dragon Knights and says that the man standing before them was captured near the castle and refuses to talk. When he sees Tyr, Taggart says he can now complete his mission for Master Warren. He says that Kasim Hazil, the commander of the Northern Forces, has began an aggressive campaign against rebel factions. In the process, Warren and Victor were captured and taken prisoner. The next morning, Matthew says he has an important matter to discuss with Tyr. He suspects there's a spy within the Liberation Army ranks due to intelligence gathered by Kasumi and Kryn, and gains Tyr's approval to oversee military training. In the field, Matthew commands an attack against Imperial forces in the north. Sanchez questions the decision as he thought it was a drill, but Matthew says it then carries the advantage of a surprise attack. Kasim's subordinate, Griffith, is warned that an actual attack is coming, and says he will report the circumstances to Kasim. At the Battle of the Northern Checkpoint, the Imperials are crushed, and Griffith surrenders. For sparing the lives of his troops, he agrees to join the Liberation Army. Matthew recommends following with another offensive into the north, while Lepant attacks the fortress of Duha, and Humphrey attacks the fortress of Rockland. By forcing Kasim to reinforce the forts, Matthew hopes that Moravia Castle can be taken, and Warren and Victor can be freed. Griffith agrees to pretend he has captured Matthew so Tyr can sneak inside Moravia. At the gates, the Imperial forces speak of marching to Rockland, and the ruse to sneak inside the castle succeeds. Inside, he finds Warren and Victor in the cell, and Kasumi frees them. Warren thanks Tyr and joins the party. Inside the castle, Matthew is brought before Kasim Hazil, who asks him why he defected from the Empire. He faults him for becoming a traitor by joining the Liberation Army, and asks him to return. As they exchange words, Kasim is told that the Liberation Army has surrounded the castle. As it turns out, Matthew tipped the city-state of Jalston off to the Imperial March, and was able to overcome Kasim's forces. Lepant and Humphrey return, reporting of their successes. When Tyr arrives as well, Matthew asks Kasim to surrender, and says that the Emperor has been corrupted. Milich also appears and advises Kasim to stand down. Ultimately, he agrees to surrender and joins the Liberation Army. After their return to Toran Castle, only the Imperial capital of Gregminster remains to be taken. After debating various options of attack, Matthew suggests using 500 boats to take Sonia Shulin's floating fortress of Shasarazade. The next morning, the Liberation Army uses the 500 boats to commence their assault. Sonia swears to defend the fortress, but falls to the might of the Liberation Army. Matthew says the fortress will be burned with oil, so Tyr must close the floodgate. Inside, they encounter Shell Venus, a powerful foe that stands in their way. When it is defeated, Victor climbs the floodgate and closes it. As they all attempt to exit the area, Sonia intercepts the party. She asks Tyr why he chose to betray the Empire and his father, and incite violence and rebellion. Before he can answer, the oil is lit and pours into the fortress. Sonia attacks, but she's defeated by the adventurers. As she speaks of walking into the fire to end her life, Victor stops her and brings her out of the fortress. Outside, Matthew is found injured, lying on the ground. Tyr arrives to observe Flick scolding Sanchez for lighting the oil on fire before receiving orders to do so, and he demands that he answer for his actions. Unexpectedly, Sanchez says that he has been deceiving the Liberation Army the entire time, and has been acting as a spy for the Emperor. When Flick asks if Sanchez is to blame for the death of Odessa, Sanchez again admits fault. Enraged, Flick pulls out his sword and prepares to take his head. Before he can swing his blade, Matthew awakens and warns that killing Sanchez will compromise the morale of the Liberation Army. For now, he says, they should focus instead on taking Gregminster. In a Toran castle cell, Sonia says she cannot discard her loyalty to the Emperor, and Cleo reveals she knows of her personal relationship with Teo. Tyr asks her to join the Liberation Army, and though she refuses to fight, she agrees. Matthew says everyone must now make preparations to march to the capital. Tyr gives the orders to proceed, and all the soldiers are gathered together. Matthew announces that the time has come to end the Imperial regime, and encourages everyone to commit everything they have to the goal. In that moment, Leknot appears again. She says that the rune of the gate was split in two, and both she and her sister carry a part of it. As she announces that all 108 Stars of Destiny have assembled together, Victor says they are missing one, Gremio. Revealing the power of her rune, she asks everyone to think of their friend, and beckons the Gate of Dimensions to unite the 108 Stars of Destiny. Suddenly, Gremio appears alive in front of everyone, and is greeted by all of his elated friends. After they all pledge to pursue the victory together, the final battle is launched. Leknot uses her power to destroy Windy's immense swarm of monsters. Uber realizes that the source of the magic must be Leknot, but says she will never be able to overcome Windy's sorcery. As they prepare to attack, Joshua joins the struggle and calls upon the Dragon Rune to vanquish more of the monsters. Uber orders a forward march, and the two armies clash. On the battlefield, Uber forecasts victory, but the Liberation Army is too much for him to handle. Uber says it is the end of the country, and runs off after adding he will not miss it much. The dwarves, Rokaku ninjas, and Zorak have all arrived to lend their support. After assembling a party, Tyr, Victor, and Flick charge through the gate of Gregminster. Matthew warns of the Emperor's strength and asks the group to fulfill his sister's dream. En route to the palace, they encounter Ein Guide, who stands in their way. He refuses to stand down and attacks the group. Despite his strength, he is defeated and dies as he apologizes to the Emperor for his failure. Inside the palace, Tyr and his friends fight their way through Imperial soldiers. At the end of the Imperial Gardens, they find Emperor Barbarossa himself, commending Tyr for making it this far. He says that he will protect all that remains of his empire with his own hands. Raising his blade, he calls upon the Dragon King's sword and transforms into a giant three-headed dragon. After he is defeated, 4 of the 5 great generals enter the balcony. Kasim laments that the Emperor has changed and says he was deceived by Windy. In that moment, she appears and mocks Barbarossa for his defeat. She says he should be ashamed to call himself the Golden Emperor, but Kasim stands up for him. Windy knocks Kasim to the ground and says that the Scarlet Moon Empire is dead. When Windy attempts to grab the Soul Eater again, the rune begins to glow and releases its incredible power. Odessa, Gremio, Teo, and Ted all appear, locking Windy into a magical force field. The magical force erupts as the rune rejects Windy, who agonizes in her failure. Barbarossa tells Windy to stop persisting for the rune and says his sovereign rune has protected him from her magic. While Windy believed that the black rune she gave to the Emperor brought him under her power, he says that he lied the entire time and assisted Windy because he truly loved her. He thought Windy was changeable, but realized that he was wrong. The Emperor admits that his mistake cost him his empire and asks what type of country Tyr will create in its stead. As the remaining generals look on, Barbarossa bids everyone farewell. He jumps with Windy off the balcony, ending their lives and causing the entire palace to tremble. As they hurry to escape, Victor and Flick agree to stall Imperial soldiers so the party can exit the palace. The two raise their swords, vowing to fight together to allow the escape of Tyr and the others. Inside Gregminster, the Liberation Army realizes that the Empire has been brought to an end and celebrates their successes together. As he is resting, Matthew is informed of the triumph. He expresses his disdain for war and wonders whether he made the right decision. In that moment, he dies, and Liu Khan tells him to rest in peace. In the absence of the Scarlet Moon Empire, the Toran Republic is established. Tyr is elected its first president, and many who fought alongside him become military commanders and officials in the new Republican government. Victor and Flick are considered missing in action in the final battle. Luke disappears with Leknot. Peshmerga leaves the country in search of Uber. Milich spends his life protecting the grave of Barbarossa. Leon Silverberg spends time in his hometown. Gremio stays by Tyr's side. Cleo continues to protect Teo's mansion, now tired of fighting. Pan embarks upon a journey to improve himself. Tai-Ho returns to Kaku and enjoys a carefree life. Hicks is now considered a true warrior and departs with Tengar on a journey. Liu Khan opens a clinic where he saves many more lives. Humphrey and Futch set out on a journey together. Kirkus and Sylvina marry. Jen returns to Tien and continues to build ships. Joshua returns to the Dragon's Den and trains his son. Apple works on a biography of Matthew. Kryn steals Gregminster's treasures and vanishes. In the last scene, Tyr and Gremio walk out of the gates of Gregminster together, and the two gaze into the sky. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more story explanation videos, and click the bell to be alerted upon the creation of new content. Also, please consider using the join functionality to support the channel, check out my other videos, and leave a comment below with your favorite moment from the story of Suikoden.